All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Ashley, one of the attorneys here at Altitude. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about termination, merger, and separation of communities. So basically marriage and divorce. On your screen, you should be seeing the PowerPoint presentation. You should see a small box, which is me. And then on the right side of the menu is a private chat. That's where you'll type in your questions. And I will try to address them probably at the end of the presentation to the extent that we have time. If you have audio or video issues during the presentation, you will click the button that says no audio or video. I can't do much from where I'm at, so you'll click that button and that will tell the person who's running the magic behind the scenes. She will help you and it will give you some instructions to follow. One CMCA credit certificate is automatically generated and emailed to you within 48 hours after the webinar, assuming you attend the entire thing. You can't transfer those to other people. And then please save the image of the certificate. So if you wish to keep it, you'll have to save it because it will disappear. No, I don't know. But it's only available for 30 days. So you either need to save it or print it. As a reminder, we're going to record this and add it to the Altitude YouTube channel within a couple of days. And of course, there will be a survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar. Please fill that out. We do value your feedback. I won't tell you if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all, but rather let us know and let me know because it will help me as we move forward. All right, so termination, separation, and merger of communities. So termination, that's when we say over it, we're out, we want out. We don't want to be in a community, an association, common interest community anymore. Merger, that is where we're going to take two communities and make them into one single community. We're talking marriage. And then separation, of course, is it's not you, it's us. We were merged, but we don't want to be anymore. All right, so we're going to look at a couple different things as we go through here. There's two primary areas we're looking at. One is going to be Kiowa, of course, and then the other is going to be the nonprofit code, because as we are doing any of these steps, we have to look to both. As you probably know, we have both the actual association, the CIC, whether it's condo or planned, and then of course we have the corporation, the nonprofit corporation, which is the business end of the association. So we're going to look at 218, which governs termination, and then Colorado Revised Statute, that's what the CRS is. Title 7, Article 134 governs dissolution. So again, termination, that's when we're talking about the association no longer being in existence and then dissolving the nonprofit corporation. So in order to do this, we have to have a termination agreement. It has to be proposed by the board and then executed by the owners, so approved by the owners in the community. And in order to be approved by the owners in the community, it has to have owner signature and at least 67% of owners have to sign. Now, contrast that with a lot of amendments, right? Amendments, it's between 51 and 67% maximum for the most part for amendments, versus termination, at least 67% or more if the governing documents require. So if your declaration says, no, you need 75%, then you're going to need 75% in this instance. The agreement must have a date by which it is void by. What that means is the agreement is going to set forth a number of different things in it. But it's also going to have a date that says if this agreement is not recorded with the clerk and recorder of all of the counties that the association is in or located, then it's void and you would have to start over. It's no good. And then of course it's only effective upon recording. So we do need to record it with the clerk and recorder once it is signed and approved. And then as part of this, not only do you have to have the owners voting, the 67% or any larger percentage, but you have to send the agreement via certified mail or hand delivery to every city. So every municipality where the planned community is located. Now, some of you are only within one county or one city, and that's fine. But others of you kind of straddle either two counties or two municipalities, et cetera. So in that case, you would have to send it to all of those. All right. So part of what we got to talk about with termination is what the heck do we do with this stuff, right? And by stuff, I mean common elements, for example, maintenance obligations, insurance obligations. Those are all things that you have to discuss as an association and set forth as to what you're going to do with it. Now, when it comes to common elements in horizontal boundary communities, so condos, for example, the agreement can provide that all of the common elements and units are going to be sold following the termination of the community. Or it doesn't have to. It can say everybody keeps their own and you'll figure something else out. But it can require it. And if the agreement does require a sale of the common elements or the units, then the agreement has to itself set forth minimum terms of the sale that the association plans to enter into. Conversely, if you're in an association without horizontal boundaries, so like a planned communities, you can say that it provides for the sale of common elements, but you can't require the units to be sold following termination unless the declaration as originally recorded would allow it, or 100% of owners allow all of the units, lots, residents to be sold. So again, in the condo communities, you can do it. In the planned communities, you can't do it unless everyone says, okay, that's fine, or the original declaration would allow you to. The 67% that I was referring to is 67% approval. So at least 67% must vote to approve the agreement, not just 67% voting in general. Okay, so then when it comes to selling the property, the association can contract for the sale of the real estate, sale of the common elements, for example, following the termination of the association, subject to the provisions in the agreement. What you can't do is say one thing in the agreement and then go do something else outside of the agreement. The contract is not binding, though. So if the association enters into a contract to sell the property, the common elements, for example, that contract is not binding until you have that owner approval on the agreement. And then once the property is sold, the title to once the association is terminated, the title to the property still is vested with or in the association's name until everything's kind of settled, right? Until it's officially sold. So it vests in the association as trustee for all of the owners. And then once everything sells, the proceeds from that are distributed to owners and lien holders according to their interests. And I have more to say on that on the next slide. Owners still will live or can live in the property, can occupy the property and hold as long as the association has that real estate in their name, unless the agreement provides otherwise. But part of allowing owners to stay in, for example, the condo unit until everything sells is owners are still responsible for the assessments and compliance under the declaration. So if you're going to stay as an owner, or you're allowing your owners to stay pursuant to the agreement, if the agreement sets forth that the sale is going to be after the termination, owners then have that right to occupancy. But owners need to be reminded that even though the association is terminated, they're still liable for assessments and obligations and such as that until the title transfers. Okay, so what happens after it's terminated? Owners that are still holding any property remaining, so property that wasn't sold or even common elements that weren't sold, the owners are now going to hold that property as tenants in common, meaning they're all going to own it. Creditors of the association, after the association is terminated, so owners voted to terminate and the agreement's been recorded, any creditors of the association who had obtained or recorded a lien against the community, whether that's a loan that the association had taken out and secured by the community, or whether it's, an association was sued and has a mechanics lien filed against it, those liens continue on the property. And generally, the proceeds from a sale are going to pay off those liens. I say generally because, of course, sometimes you can dispute it, etc. So remember on the last slide where I said that the proceeds go to the owners and lien holders based on their interest. Owner proceeds are going to be, or the proceeds in general, are only going to be determined after everything is sold and paid for. So whatever's left over after these liens have been paid off, so on and so forth. Now, your declaration, and we should always look at these documents beforehand, and I'm going to remind you of that a couple times, but the declaration may require that you also have other lenders, for example, or other lien holders, security interests, mortgage companies, et cetera, approve some of the actions. So again, always look to those documents first. But at any rate, we're going through termination. Now, we're going to go to, once you've terminated or while you're terminating the actual community, we also want to look to dissolve the nonprofit corporation. And that's going to be governed by Article 7, Title 7, Article 134 of the Nonprofit Code. So separately, now we're talking separately from your termination agreement, your board has to also come up with what's called a dissolution proposal. So they adopt a proposal to dissolve, and it can be conditioned on any basis. So for example, you can say that the corporation only dissolves following the recording of the termination agreement, or the corporation only dissolves in, if these factors are met, so on and so forth. The board then recommends again to the members, and in our associations, the members tend to be all of the members of the community that, one vote per lot or unit. And then the members get to vote against or vote to approve the dissolution. The same type of thing applies where they can condition that approval on any basis. So the membership can say, we'll approve this, but only if it provides X, Y, and Z. The corporation has to give notice, of course, to the voting members. You have to hold a meeting, and the notice is given to pursuant to 127-104. Now, 127-104 typically requires between 10 and 60 days notice of special meeting. You'll remember, of course, that Kiowa requires 10 to 50 days. So you'll want to stay within the confines, of course, of both. So I would go under 50. And the notice must also be sent out in accordance with the bylaws. Again, your bylaws probably say 10 to 50 or should. You will include a copy of the proposal, and then it requires a majority vote to approve the dissolution proposal unless the articles, bylaws, or declaration require otherwise. And some of you in your articles, you'll actually have dissolution provisions in there, provisions by which you must adhere to dissolve the nonprofit corporation. And they very well might require a significantly higher approval rate, approval of the members. So we'll want to check on that too. And then your plan of dissolution, much like your termination agreement, right? You have to have some plan for common elements in the termination agreement or the property, the real estate, et cetera. Your plan of dissolution also has to include where your assets are held, where they're going to go, where they're being distributed after all your creditors are going to be paid. Now, remember, when it comes to assets, we're not only talking about like physical property, but we're also talking about things like bank accounts and investments, reserve funds, so on and so forth. And then, let's see. So the notice must contain that proposal, a summary thereof, the plan of dissolution where everything is held. And then it must be filed with the Secretary of State after it has been approved. The articles of dissolution, so once the dissolution proposal is dissolved, the plan, you will then have the articles of dissolution. So right now you have articles of incorporation. We would then file what are called articles of dissolution, which is the name of the corporation, principal office address, that the corporation is dissolved. So what happens after all of that? First of all, the corporation, even though it's dissolved, is allowed to carry on activities that are directly related to winding up and liquidating its affairs. So even though we filed the documents to dissolve the corporation, and it still continues to operate to wind everything up. It can't operate for purposes other than winding up and carrying out the liquidation of liquidating, but it still can continue those. And then the filing the articles of dissolution, the dissolving of the corporation doesn't transfer title. That's all done separately, right? So just because you dissolve the articles and terminate the community, you still have to do things like transfer the deeds, right? Those are all separate processes for sales and things like that. Transferring accounts, distributing proceeds, so on and so forth. The dissolution becomes official upon filing the effective date of the articles of dissolution. However, you have to file those with the Secretary of State, and then you're done. You're not actually done. You have to wind up, but that's at least the legal steps according to the nonprofit code as we go. Now, keep in mind, guys, this is a very general overview of these processes that you would need to do. It's probably sounds complicated if it's the first thing you've heard about. It also is very oversimplified. So you're going to want to get in and talk to your attorneys. You're going to want to poll your membership. I'm going to mention this again later as a reminder, just to keep things going. All right, mergers. We made it through terminations. So mergers are when we take two associations and we merge them into one association. Now, if your copy, much like this one here, says 21, it's actually 221. So I apologize for the typo there. I did not catch that until this morning. So we're under section 221 of Kiowa, and then of course Article 131 of Title 7, much like terminations and dissolution of the corporation. We also have to do merger agreements, and then we have to merge the articles of incorporation. So mergers are when we take two or more associations, combine them into one single association, and they have to be the same form of ownership. So if we have two planned communities, single family homes example, or we have two condo communities, then those can be merged together, the two condo communities into one, the two planned communities into one. What we can't do is we can't merge a planned community with a condo community because it's separate forms of ownership, right? A condo community, all the owners have a joint interest in common elements. The planned community is slightly different. So we can't do those together. We would have to create a brand new community basically. But for purposes of merger, if there's the same type of ownership, we can merge them. Again, merger agreements, it has to be proposed by the board. It has to be approved by owners. It's the same percentage of votes that would be required to terminate the community. So at least 67% or more if your declaration provides. The merger agreement has to also be prepared, executed, recorded in the clerk and recorder for every county. It has to be certified by the president of each association that's combining, and it's not effective until it's officially recorded. Now, the merger, it creates one community, which becomes what's called the legal successor of the pre-existing communities. What that means is if you take community one and you have community A over here, and you merge the two together, that new community 1A or 2 or whatever you want to call it now carries all of the obligations, et cetera, that both the communities previously had, right? Because we've merged them all. So that's what legal successor is. All the things and stuff that were done beforehand are now solely the one community's responsibility, but also the obligations, the legal liabilities, et cetera. It all carries through to the one community that we've now merged. We also have to provide in that merger agreement allocation of interests or reallocation of interests. So if, again, community A has 10 units and community 1 has 20 units, when they merge, we're now going to have a community with 30 units. So the allocated interests change. If they are one of 10 and one of 20, we're now in one of 30 in the merged community. Or if it's a formula based on, for example, square footage, we want to set that formula again in the merger agreement, because it's, while not necessarily changing the formula, the allocated interests are changing based upon what all's in the merged community. Okay. So the merger, like I said earlier, much like terminations where you have both the corporation and the association, mergers, we have both the corporation merger, the nonprofit corporation merger, and the community merger. So the nonprofit corporation merger is under Title 7 of 131. And so that's where the board, again, must adopt a merger plan. So it's called a merger agreement under Kiowa. It's a merger plan under the nonprofit code. They, again, send it out. All the members have to vote on it. And there also might be additional members who have to vote on this depending on what your articles say. So sometimes the articles will require I don't know, a declarant vote. They might require lien holder votes, whatever. So we have to double check those. And then, of course, we have to send out notice again to all the members and enclose the plan with the notice. The notice is also sent pursuant to the same conditions that the termination would be sent if we were doing a termination. Once the statement of merger, so the merger setting forth all the obligations and the allocated interests and everything is approved, we would then file it with the Secretary of State. Now, as part of this, as part of this merger, and sometimes as part of a termination, we may want to amend declarations, right? In cases of merger, we will want to amend a declaration. We want to amend the declaration to set forth different responsibilities or insurance or allocation or whatever. So that's going to be, again, a separate process entirely. But I just want to mention that as we're going through it. So the effect of the merger, of course, is one single entity. You with me so far? All right. And I know we have some questions coming in, but I think we're okay. All right. Now we're going to do our little talk about separation or withdrawal, or as one of the attorneys in the office likes to call it, merger in reverse. So when we have a merged community already, so they were two communities, they're now one community, and they don't like it anymore. They want to get out of it. So how do we withdraw? So that's going to be governed under Kiowa. It's 221.5. And what it says is basically that it has to be separately platted subdivisions. So we can't say, okay, we have one community, one platted subdivision, and we're going to merge or we're going to separate. You're not really separating or withdrawing. In that event, you would be creating an entirely new community. So it would fall into a different part of Kiowa. So for withdrawal from the merged community, 221.5, you have to have the separately platted subdivision. You have to have the two separate associations. So the owners previously had been required to pay into two separate associations. It had to be in existence for 25 years, self-operating. And then the total number of owners for the individual, if we were to separate, is going to be 15% or less of all the owners in the community. So you can't say we're going to withdraw from the community and take 95% of all the owners and be in this community, right? Because wasn't a merger, so it can't really be a true separation. And then with this one, with the merger, it's a higher percentage. So it's 75% of owners have voted. So earlier when we were talking about, one of the questions was, well, do you need 67% of people voting or 67% of people to approve? And I said, well, it's at least 67% of people to approve. In this case, in the case of a separation, you have to have at least 75% of owners even voting on the issue. And then at least a majority of those votes have voted to withdraw. And the withdrawal cannot substantially impair the rest of the community to enforce covenants, etc. This is to withdraw without consent of that other community. If any of these things are not true, then you're going to need consent of the other community to do so. Again, though, you might have documents, your governing documents, that say, well, no, we have to do X, Y, and Z on top of that. So these are just kind of your bare minimum that are set forth under the statutes right now. All right, now things we need to think about. What are we going to do with all this stuff, right? Who is taking over common elements in a termination? What are we doing with them? Are we selling them? Are we hoping the city just takes them for free? Do we have a group of owners who's willing to purchase them? Do we have a different association that wants to take, the parcel with the pond on it, so on and so forth? Services. What services have we been providing as an association that owners are now going to have to provide on their own? We get these questions a lot where people come in and say, well, we just want to dissolve the HOA. And that's fine. You can do that. It's a lengthy and expensive process, but you have to think. You can't just say, well, we're going to dissolve the HOA and the county will take care of everything, or the city will take care of everything. Owners, I don't think, myself included, in an HOA, right? We don't, unless you're overly involved in your association, you don't necessarily see all of the things that the association provides, right? So where is that going to go? If the association insures the exteriors or replaces the roof of my home, now I, as the owner, am going to have to take that on. If the association previously maintained the park or the pool or the one parcel of land that most of us didn't even know was in the association, that has to go somewhere. Who's going to do the mowing or the landscaping or whatever else is required of it? So we have to provide for that, not only in our plan, but also before we even get to the point where we're voting on this, where's it going? Where are our ideas? We want to be very transparent with owners in the community because this is affecting all of us and potentially may lower some of our costs, right? If we're not all chipping in for insurance, for example, for an association, but it also could raise our individual costs if we have to contract for trash services or cable services or whatever else the association is going to provide. And then of course it's expensive. It's expensive to do any of these things. So how are you going to pay for it? Are you going to go to owners and say, well, I know owners, you are already concerned with our increasing assessments by $25 a year, but now we want to spend another, X amount of thousands of dollars on a termination? Maybe they do. I don't know, but it's not going to go over well. So we want to do a lot of background work ahead of time to find out where we're at as a community and how many people want it. Because sometimes the people that we hear from, it's going to be purely just the loudest sometimes, right? And so sometimes, not only with terminations, but quite frankly, we see this with like chickens, right? You'll get two people in the community that want chickens and it sounds like the whole community does, and then they vote it down. The same thing with the termination. Mergers, when we're merging, our assessments increasing, decreasing, staying the same? When we're joining two communities, what does that mean? And it might be both. It might be that this community is merging with this other community and their assessments are going to increase because now more services are being provided, while this part of the community, their assessments aren't increasing because they're paying for the same thing they've always been paid. I don't know. And then when you're expanding the community like that, because ultimately when you're merging, it's an expansion for one or the other side, right? Is that more amenities or services? Is it less? Are you amending the declaration as part of it to provide for or against some of those things? And then, of course, back to the overall cost. How much is it going to cost to do this? Are our owners on board? Is the other community on board? The last thing you want to do with any of these, or quite frankly, anything else, is go gung-ho into it. And then you're, couple $1,000s in, $10,000 in, $20,000 in, and realize that people didn't want this to begin with. And then with separation, similar concerns. Are the assessments increasing or decreasing? Who's going to provide the services that were previously offered? Do you need those services that were previously offered? If your prior declarations said, yes, you're getting whatever ABC services, and now you're withdrawing or separating from that community, does that mean that you're going to continue to provide those services for your owners whose assessments are going to increase to cover them? Or does that mean that you're going to not provide those services? And if you're not providing the services, does your declaration require you to provide them? Because if it does, we're going to have to amend the declaration, separate process, separate cost, to switch those services out, right? To say we're no longer insuring your roof or maintaining your roof. Now your owners are going to have to do it individually because we can't do it because we're a smaller association. And of course, there might be legal ramifications, right? If you're a condo community and you're trying to separate from another condo community, you're post-Kiowa, you don't really have the luxury of saying we're no longer going to insure the exterior, right? Right? You didn't have it before, you're not going to have it after. It doesn't change that. So those are all things we need to think about. And as we're talking about these, you'll notice that I talked about Kiowa communities. So the other consideration that I'm going to mention to you is if you are not a Kiowa community, if you are a pre-Kiowa community, then these parts of Kiowa don't apply to you, right? So then what do you do? Well, if you have all of these provisions set forth, for example, termination in your documents, then you could follow the process set forth in your documents to terminate or to, dissolve or whatever. But if you do not have that and you're not subject to Kiowa, what do? Do you amend the documents to make yourself subject to Kiowa so that you can then take advantage of these provisions? That very possibly might be the easiest way. It might not. If you don't have any provisions in your documents, you might have to do that. Become a Kiowa community in order to take advantage of the provisions allowing you to dissolve, right? It sounds like a lot of steps and hoops to jump through, and yet doing so would allow you to take advantage of those parts of the law that would then subsequently allow you to dissolve. If you don't do that, do you have other options? So why am I telling you all this? Because again, this is a very simplified overview of all of this, and it ends up being quite a bit more complicated with all of the things you need to do to walk through it, and it's going to be expensive. And I need you to think about that, and I need your owners to think about that before you just come in and say, well, we want to just dissolve the community, because you guys know as well as I do, we're getting owners that say, well, I just don't want to be a part of it anymore. Okay, fine, but what do we do? All right, so what happens if you don't have enough money to do it? Owners won't agree to it. Bigger problem, owners just don't care enough to agree or disagree to it. You're going to have a hard push for it. Going back to what I said earlier, where you want to go through and pull your membership, you want to do that ahead of time. However, whether you're doing informational meetings, you're doing a survey monkey, I've seen that go out that says, how likely would you be to vote for this? Where do you want these services to go? Are you willing to take these on yourself or pay for them yourself? So on and so forth. If you don't have that, if you don't have enough money to do any of these things, then you need to start budgeting for it. And in order to budget for it, you're going to have your owners on board, right? Because if you increase assessments too much and you're using, for example, the Kiowa budgeting process, then those owners can come in and vote to veto it. Or if you're on the other hand, which requires owner approval to increase your budget, they may vote not to approve it, and then you're in the same boat. Owner apathy is a much more difficult one to overcome, I think, because then you don't know why it's not passing. You just know nobody cares enough to come and show up and vote. If that's the situation, that's going to be a lot of boots on the ground, going around trying to talk to everybody. It's hard to get people involved unless there's something they're very angry about, then they will be involved right away. So that's something that you're going to have to talk to your community about. You're going to have to talk to your attorneys about. Can't find a buyer for common elements. Don't assume that the city's just going to take back the common elements. There's a reason that the municipality or the county approved the developer's plans to begin with, right? And it wasn't because the city said, here, go ahead and do this. We want to do it later, right? They approve it because then the developer sets up this quasi municipality, so to speak, of a community that enforces its own covenants. And so the city isn't necessarily going to just say, sure, we'd love to take on that responsibility for maintaining all of these areas that you don't want anymore. All right, so solutions, we talked about budgeting. Sometimes just amending the documents. If somebody comes in and says, the community says, we want to dissolve the association, you might have other options. You might have options to amend the documents to remove some of the provisions for enforcement so that you have less things to enforce. You might be able to shift some of the insurance obligations. Those can be things that are all ways of not terminating the community while still lessening a lot of the prior things you had to deal with. Now, if you do that, you're going to have some owners who say, but I moved into this community because of the covenants, because of the enforcement, because I want to live in a community where I can count on the board to enforce landscaping on my neighbor's property. If you have those people, this is probably not going to go over very well. You might have a group of people, though, that say, we don't want to deal with this anymore, and we want to amend as much as possible out of our documents. You can also do kind of a combination. You can do a termination while still amending the declaration to have covenants. Those covenants would not allow a board, because there's no board to enforce the covenants, but it would still allow an owner to sue another owner because they're not complying with these covenants that still run with the land. Another solution when it comes to these issues is find out where the issues are. And I say this all the time with declaration amendments too, right? If it's not passing, is it not passing because there's a certain part of the agreement in this case, or a certain issue? Is it a misunderstanding? Is it owners that just, again, apathy? Like, where is that issue and can we fix it? And sometimes we can. Certainly if it's a misunderstanding, if it's a I'm afraid of it, if it's a I don't want to do this, we might be able to go back in and amend the agreements or the plans to persuade those owners to vote for them if that's where we want to go. We might not be able to. They might never be on board because they wanted a covenant controlled community. Neighborhood canvassing, that's the boots on the ground. You have to get out and talk to everyone. You have to lay the groundwork. Before you start on this, I would have conversations. Again, I wouldn't assume the city's going to take it back. I would go out and talk to them and say, what do we want to do? Will you take it? Are there other neighborhoods? I had a community, it did not dissolve, but it took some of its, it took a parcel of land that it never used and it gave it to it sold it to a different community who was nearby who would use it. So there's options there too. And then of course, nothing we've talked about is easy or cheap today, right? It's going to require a lot of money. It's going to require a lot of reviewing your governing documents and talking to your legal counsel, right? We can't just go in and say, okay, well, we're done. I'm going to do this agreement myself. Great. Everything's over. Please don't do that. First of all, it's not going to be done right in most cases. And secondly, it's going to cost you like 3 times as much to come in and have somebody fix it. Okay, so that's all I'm going to talk about today. But now I'm going to go over an attempt to answer some of your questions. Okay, where do mortgage loan covenants come into play with termination? Yeah, so and then what's the risk that mortgage loans will be called? So some of your documents are going to require your mortgages to sign off on things like a termination agreement. Other owners may have mortgages that were, most owners in a community have mortgages that were based in part on the community. And so that is another consideration for your owners to go speak to their mortgage companies to say, if this happens, what happens to my loan? Can it be modified? Do I have to, what's it called? Re-up it? I can't think of the word right now. I'm so sorry. But if I have to go in and, redo my loan, is it going to be at a higher interest rate? Because if I'm paying more for that, then maybe it's not worth it to me to dissolve or terminate the community. So it just depends. It depends on what the covenants say. It depends on what your documents say and whether they're required to get lien holder approval. I would err on the side of caution and assume you probably have to and build that into your budget, because that is also going to be a huge factor with any of these, more so with the termination and a little with the separation. All right. Does the separation option apply to master and sub association setups? Separation doesn't, because if you're by nature of being a master and a sub association, then you're 2 associations as opposed to a merged association. So you would not withdraw from a merged community. We can separate a master and sub. It's just not under this part of Kiowa. It's a different process, because again, the merger and the separation we were talking about today has to do with the creation of one community, versus this would be 2 separate communities. So what we would be looking at trying to do is withdraw the sub completely, and separate them into 2 separate communities, as opposed to we're taking them from 2 separate communities and then separating them out from the master, as opposed to having one community where we're separating it into 2 or more. I hope that makes sense, because I did not explain it very well. How many associations have ever terminated in Colorado to date? I don't know off the top of my head. I can tell you that while we've handled terminations here, and we've handled mergers and separations, it's not a lot. And the reason it's not a lot is because it's a huge pain in the butt and it's expensive. Not necessarily for us, but for you guys, right? We will do it if you ask us to, but usually by the time an association gets to the point where we start looking at what it's going to cost and where everything needs to go, it ends up being a decision that they say, you know what, I think we're just going to stay where we are. And then they look to amending the covenants instead. Is the separation similar to selling a clubhouse shared by two communities? No, not under the law. So the part of separation that I spoke about under Kiowa has to do with separating one community, separating it back into two communities or more if there were more than two communities combined. Selling a clubhouse shared by two communities, that's going to be a different process. That's going to rely on your bylaws, articles, and declaration of both sides. You're going to look at things like, first of all, is it a shared interest? Is it pursuant to the documents or a joint ownership agreement? And if so, if it's a separate agreement, what does that agreement say as to selling the property? And then what do your individual declarations say? Does it require ownership, membership approval to sell or convey the property? A lot of times it will. So it'd be, while similar in that you're selling, it's not similar to the separation we talked about. This will, I am told, be recorded on our Altitude channel within a couple of days. However, Courtney, who is, like I said, the magic behind, the wizard behind the curtain here, will tell me if that's wrong. Can the sub have a management contract with a different company than the master and still be under the same umbrella? So sub associations and master associations are two separate associations, and by the very nature of them can have two separate management companies. We see that a lot. We've also seen ones a lot where they have the same management company. I don't know what you mean by under the same umbrella. It would be two separate contracts, two separate associations, and two separate agreements. So it wouldn't be the same umbrella, so to speak, if we're talking about umbrella in the same way. Is termination required prior to selling all units under an obsolescence clause? It depends on the reasons for the obsolescence. So there's parts of Kiowa I did not talk about today having to do with things like judicial dissolutions or things like foreclosure, so on and so forth. So it's going to depend on what that clause says and what your documents say. All right. Oh, and I am told by our wizard it will be posted on YouTube within 24 hours. So if you just didn't get enough today, there you go. 67% needed to vote or needed to vote either yes or no. I think we answered that earlier. It's 67% on the termination. At least 67% must vote yes. All right. Townhomes that share common interior walls, exterior walls, roadways, snow removal, general grounds maintenance, masonry, etc. If it were to terminate its association, it would leave no legal mechanism to force residents to pay their equal share for repairs and maintenance. Would I agree with that? Maybe. So if we're talking about townhomes, it depends on whether they're a planned community or a condo community, because as you probably remember, there's no reference to townhomes specifically under Kiowa. It's either a condo community or a planned community. And then when we're talking about party walls, we might have to do a separate party wall agreement. We might have to do one of the things I talked about earlier where we do not terminate, but we amend the declaration so that owners can continue to enforce covenants that run with the land. So it's everybody's favorite lawyer answer, which is it just depends, because it does. It depends on what type of agreement we're doing, what we're putting in our termination agreement, whether there's additional agreements that we may need to create or that are already in existence, and what we want to do with owner to owner type of things. That could be, remember how we talked about terminations and mergers, and they can put different clauses in there. We might need to put something in there that says this is only terminated upon the enactment of these individual, owner agreements. All right, I think we're through all the questions. We're going to, lucky for you guys, end slightly early, unless there are any others. I'm looking. Give me a minute. I'm getting old, so it takes me a while. Okay, I think that's everything. So again, reminder, takeaways, poll your community, budget, consult your legal counsel, read your docs. That's really not just for this, guys, like for anything you're doing in the association. Those should be your steps. All right. I think that's everything. Have a great day. I hope this helps. And I'll talk to you later. Thanks for coming. Bye.